Today, um, let's start off with a prayer and then we can jump in. How's that? Lord, we know that gratitude is not just an emotion, it's something that we do, it's a way of being. And we know that we need to tend our grateful hearts like we would tend a garden. So, God, please help us to see the blessings instead of
Charity, you went mute for some reason. I'm sure it was a beautiful prayer.
That was nice. Did you hear any of it or just switch to mute or something?
Yeah, kind of in the middle of the prayer.
Okay. All right. Well, God heard it. So good morning, everybody. You've just got me today. Tom's is back here. So we are switching it out for you. We're going to probably do it a little bit differently today. So hopefully it goes well and you guys can help us through this gratitude thing. I'm going to share my screen because I did want to share a few slides for you because I'm a slide person. Here we go. Can you guys see the screen? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'm going to start off with a story. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Lady Elgin. The Lady Elgin was a steamboat ship back in 1860, I think. Kind of a party boat. And one night the revelers had jumped on board, and this was kind of the after party to another party that they had experienced, celebration, and everything was going well, and everybody was drinking and dancing and eating and laughing and having a great time until tragedy struck at about 2 o'clock in the morning on the boat. Another smaller vessel basically T-boned the Lady Elgin in the river. And the smaller vessel was damaged but got to safety okay. But the Lady Elgin was not so lucky. And the passengers were trying everything they could to save themselves, jumping off board, clinging on to debris in the water. They were far enough offshore that it was really hard to get back, but close enough that a rescue effort began. And one of those rescuers was named Edward Spencer. Edward Spencer was a 24-year-old college student. He was the pride of his hometown. He had come to that city to go to Northwestern University and become a preacher. And when he heard about this accident on the river, he and his friends jumped into action. And long story short, 300 people died in the water that day. 17 were saved. All saved by Edward Spencer. He spent hours going in and out of the water to rescue people. He would have to take a break because his body was so tired and weary. And as soon as he could, he would go right back out there. Even when he got injured in the water, others were saying, come back, come back, come back. But he refused. Finally, when he was spent, he was done. He'd rescued everyone he thought he could. He was sitting by the fire trying to recuperate, and he heard voices. He heard a man who was unsuccessfully trying to save then his wife in the water. He went one more time and was able to bring those two people to safety. Unfortunately, this story has a couple tragic points. Edward Spencer, as a result of his heroic efforts that day, sustained some serious injuries, and because of the really prolonged recovery, he had to drop out of school and give up his dream of being a preacher. And he was also left to live the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Interestingly enough, a few years later, when someone visited him to ask about that night and the events of that night, one of the things he said, with tears in his eyes, he said, "Not one of those people I rescued ever came back and even said thank you." And of course, he didn't do it for the thanks. He didn't do it to earn their gratitude, but it is a sad commentary on our frequent failure in that area. Now, if you're like me, you had a strong reaction to that. How dare they? How could they possibly not come back and thank this man who saved their life, right? We have a strong reaction to ingratitude when we see it in other people. But if you think about it, it's easy to feel gratitude. I'm sure those people were very grateful, just like the lepers we read about last week were very grateful, but never get around to expressing it. And I just want us to think about that for a minute and also consider why that might be. Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas on why we have strong reactions to ingratitude in other people? And then also, is that a big deal that we also don't do a great job of expressing our gratitude? Why is this dangerous? How could it be hurtful? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I can't see everybody. Anybody? Everybody here is super grateful. I think we sang it this morning that when you said someone literally hunts you down to save you, right? Mm-hmm. That reminded you of a story in our own Christian life, right?
Yeah.
That God kicks down walls, climbs mountains, he tears down lives to save us as well. What does that mean for how we should show our gratitude as Christians? Thanks for that statement. That really helped me connect those. Anyone else? I would like for us to keep an eye out for in our life, because the more we can recognize them, the more we can remove them as barriers to gratitude in our life. And I think it's important for us to first understand and see what some of these might be. The first one, unreasonable expectations. We can expect a lot from life. We can really start to expect a lot from life, and until no matter what, we're just not satisfied. And we often put it on other people then to meet our demands, to give us what we're hoping for. And of course, they inevitably fail because they're human. And then instead of us leaning into the faithfulness and the goodness of God to provide everything for us in his unchanging love, we instead allow bitterness and resentment to kind of fracture and poison our relationships. So unreasonable expectations, that can be a huge instigator of ingratitude. Another one is entitlement. Now, of course, if you feel like whatever you get, you had coming anyway, it's hard for you to feel grateful for it, right? And I think that's one of the things that entitlement can unfortunately do. I think that when you're counting blessings with a sense of entitlement, it's kind of futile, because the grievances will always outnumber or outweigh the gifts. Another instigator of ingratitude, forgetfulness. This is probably a pretty common one, I think. Goes all the way back to the children of Israel, right? God really warned them over and over, don't forget, remember. Remember is a word that we're constantly reading in the book of Deuteronomy, right? Remember who brought you out of this. Remember what it was like in slavery. Remember the God who delivered you. It's constantly reminding them to remember. But they didn't, did they? They quickly forgot. And in fact, it was Deuteronomy 32:18 says, "You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth." In fact, Moses implemented these kind of bedrocks, these rituals to help them remember the story, help it be ingrained in their history so that they wouldn't forget. Blindness to God's grace. This reminds me of a story that I've heard somewhere when doing research for this class. And it was, so there's this guy, there was a man who somehow lost his wife's favorite earring, just one of them. And he lost, I don't know why he had his wife's earring. I don't have the backstory, but he lost his wife's earring. And it was her favorite pair. And she was on her way home and he knew she would be looking for this earring, right? So he tore the house upside down, just everywhere looking for it. No luck. Finally, he falls to his knees and he says, "God, if you will just help me find this earring, I'll give you whatever I have. I will give you half of my salary. I will serve at the church every week if you will just help me find this earring." And just kind of in desperation and defeat, he just kind of collapses onto the couch. And when he does that, out pops the earring from beneath the couch cushion, like between the cushions. And at that point he says, "No, never mind, God, I found it." Yeah, so I think a lot of times we think that we're doing things on our own and we don't realize that it's God's faithfulness and his grace, right, that we should be grateful for, not, things that are just kind of happenstance or things that we put into motion, because we don't put any of it into motion, right? God is faithful through all of it. The next one is comparison, and that's a big one. And yes, it's comparing what we have to what other people have, but it goes further than that, right? It can be comparing effort, right? Comparing what we put in to what other people put in. And then why do I do so much work and this person does so little work? Why am I making these sacrifices? This person doesn't seem to be making as many sacrifices. That is just as bit as dangerous as comparing what we receive. And I think that is one of those that it's easy to kind of devolve into just a constant hardness and a bitterness. And I think it's also neglecting God's role in our lives and that he has a specific purpose for each of us. So anytime we put the focus on ourselves, even if it's to say, I'm doing more, I think that's a dangerous instigator of ingratitude. Can you think of any other instigators of ingratitude that are not on this list? And are there any on this list that maybe speak to you more than others? I know for me, comparison, in terms of how much work I'm doing, especially around the house, that's one. I know that I can be forgetful a lot. In the moment, we're very grateful, but when that moment passes, we're on to the next moment, and we forget that we have this deep well and reservoir of example after example of God's goodness and gratefulness, or God's goodness and grace that we should be grateful for. So are there any on this list that speak to you, or are there any that you see that are not on this list that you find are common instigators of ingratitude?
One that I can think of, it's really not on the list, is when somebody is totally caught up in other circumstances of their life. I mean, they're so preoccupied with other things that are going on around them that they completely miss the good thing that was done for them. And so by default, they're not going to say thank you.
Mm-hmm. Busyness. Yep. And that's this notion that I'm not quite sure how to term it, but when we have received we've received an act, right, from someone that we're grateful for, it can feel transactional sometimes, and that then we owe the other person, right? But that's not what gratitude is. But in our head, it feels like we owe that person. And so that sense of owing someone can be uncomfortable, especially with something like your life. Really, how do you repay that? So that can be a sticky point, and we can still feel gratitude, but we don't express it. So that can be an instigator of not expressing your gratitude, because we are kind of stuck with, how do I even, like you say, Fernando, show this level of gratitude, because it's just so profound and overwhelming. But I think we should remember that it's not transactional, right? If we go back to our, major, as Christians, our major point of gratitude, right? We can never, like, the gratitude that we have for what God does for us is not transactional, because we can never even begin to repay that. And we should think about that as well when we expect gratitude from other people, and when we are called to show gratitude to other people for something that they've done as well.
And I was going to say that I think that,
and I think that it's a good idea to kind of focus on both of those, because you can't show gratitude that you don't have, and what good is gratitude that you have that you don't express? So I can certainly appreciate both of those, and I appreciate, David, that what you bring up, because that is also kind of tied into shame, right? Shame and vulnerability, which is a good segue into what I wanted to bring us to next. Hopefully we'll have time to watch at least some of this. We might have time. So if you know me, you might know that I love Brené Brown. And if you don't know Brené Brown, she is a world-renowned researcher of shame and vulnerability. And she has one of the top, if not the top, TED Talks on TEDTalk.com. So she has a little bit to say about gratitude and joy, and I wanted us to just take a listen, and then I wanted to hear what you guys think about this. Initial thoughts about what Brené shares there about the practice of gratitude and how that can change your life. Anyone? And I would encourage us to look for any cues in our day, right? Several other religions have regular moments in the day, right, where they're called to prayer, where they're called in their in their annual, calendar, certain days that are set aside to show gratitude. Or some people have a journal that they keep where they write something every day. Some people have a list that they, go back to. Do any of you have anything like that you can share as kind of a cue to initiate thankfulness in your life? Some people, I've started to do it every morning when I wake up, and I have found, as Brené says, that gratitude begets gratitude, and more joy comes from that. It's really incredible how it just compounds on itself. But it's important to get started and get that discipline going, and to get a regular habit in your day. Has anyone thought about that? Has anyone started something like that they can share with others? That appreciate everyone for sharing and participating. And we didn't get to everything today, so we'll try to squeeze it in next week. If anyone has any last comments, I will open a moment for that, and then we'll say a closing prayer.
I was going to say just one quick thing about the daily practices. I have to be careful not to get caught up in a religious way of looking at.
You don't need any reference. I'm looking
And basically,
Good.
realize that daily before I even let Satan steal the thought of trying to condemn me about how I may pray, is to go ahead and before my feet even hit the floor and say, Lord, I praise you this morning and ask you to show me the things in today that can glorify you and how I can serve you. And then just let it go with that. And then from there, just begin whatever the day is going to bring in terms of my prayer.
I love that. That's a great place to stop. Thank you so much.
There's others back here.